Hi, my name is Joe, and welcome to my channel. I mentioned in my last video that I'm currently reading a history book called Our Beloved Kin. It's a new history of King Philip's War. This is a war that happened in the colonies in New England about 100 years before the Revolutionary War. So I'm reading that. It's this book right here. I have finished it. I finished it last night, and I want to make a video on it, but since it is the 80th anniversary of D-Day. This video is taking place in 2024. It is June 6th, 80th anniversary of the invasion of Normandy. I thought I would talk about a book that I read earlier this year, and it's Stephen Ambrose's D-Day, June 6th, 1944, The Climactic Battle of World War II. I understand that there is I think there's a BookTube group currently that in June is doing a read-along of this book. By the way, I don't know if I don't plan on following any read-alongs. I kind of like to read things at my own pace. I'm not a fast reader, but sometimes I like to try to blitz through books. So anyway, I read this book earlier this year, and I enjoyed it a lot. This book has been sitting on my shelf for no joke, 20 years, if not probably a little bit more. I think I must have received it as a birthday present, probably in the 8th grade or early high school. But I finally decided to read it, and boy, am I glad I did. And this book, I think, is one of the books that single-handedly kind of kicked off my reading obsession this year, and especially kicked off my interest in military history, which previously I generally don't like to read nonfiction. If it's nonfiction, it has to be very skinny, and this is not a long book, but it's not short. And this book was incredible. What I enjoyed about it is Stephen Ambrose, it seems like most of his books are based on oral interviews and oral histories. And while I know that, I know with Band of Brothers, it's, I think, gotten him into a little bit of trouble with some details that aren't exactly right because he's just relying on those oral stories and people's memories get messed up. But the plus side is that you get, unlike a history where you're just looking at kind of, all right, this is what happened at the strategic and kind of broader tactical level in a battle. He is able to give you nitty-gritty, sometimes nasty details of war and people's experiences. And it's just absolutely incredible. And I love this book. I highly recommend this book. If you're not doing the read-along and you've never read this book, go get it. Download it on Kindle. Go buy this book and read it. You will enjoy it. It's really, really good. A few things that just were burned themselves into my brain. There's a scene in the series Band of Brothers where, and it actually comes from this book. It may be mentioned in Band of Brothers, but it's written in this book. It's a scene where the paratroopers, at least the American paratroopers, are flying in on their planes, and they're flying in very tight formation, and there's strict radio silence, so the planes can't talk. They're very tight formation, and as soon as they get over land, they hit heavy cloud coverage, and of course they're trained. When they get, when visibility just drops to zero, they all spread out so they don't hit each other, and of course that completely messed up the landing zones, and paratroopers were missing their landing zones. They were a little lost when they landed in the dark in the middle of the night. And one just incredible anecdote was the radio silence was broken by a pilot frantically saying over his radio that I have a paratrooper on the wing. He had a paratrooper's parachute stuck on the wing, and they were pulling the parachute, flying along however fast they were going. And another pilot radios back, just tilt the plane and he'll slide off. But little things like that are incredible and horrific. If you've seen the movie Saving Private Ryan, I think does a very good job of portraying what Omaha Beach was like. Omaha and the Canadian Juno Beach, if I'm not mistaken, got very nasty, and they were very, very tough. But there's details in this book that you're going to read that unfortunately they just couldn't put in in that movie. There just wasn't time to put it. One of the things was, I don't really think you see this in Saving Private Ryan, is that tanks and motorized vehicles had to get up on the beach as well. And if there's a wave of infantry that's landed before and there's wounded on the beach, the tanks need to get up the beach. And there's wounded right there in front of them. And there's chaos going around. So you can imagine what they unfortunately sometimes had to do to get up the beach. There's American troops wounded in front of them, and they need to get out of the water. Really horrible stuff. But I must admit, I am drawn to the extremes of human experience. And you'll find that in a book on war, especially based on kind of nitty-gritty details and interviews of just the common soldier that was there. So I highly recommend this book. It was excellent. It does, you should know going into it if you've never read it, it focuses on Americans. Ambrose had Americans to interview. There are chapters on the British and Canadians, but it's not nearly as much as the Americans. And there is a little bit of the German perspective sprinkled throughout the book. It's mostly Americans. Just know that going in. But I highly recommend it. It's excellent. So up next, I'm going to take some time now. This might be kind of a longer video, so if you just want to read, if you just wanted to hear about D-Day, read it, enjoy it. But for the next several minutes, I'm going to talk about my World War II reading list. I will mention some World War II books that I have read this year and in the past, but mostly I wanted to kind of give a bookshelf tour. Obviously, I'm still down here in the basement. The library is upstairs. At some point, I will make a video with the bookshelf behind me so you guys can see it. But I brought a number of my World War II books down. So the next book that I want to talk about briefly is the sequel to D-Day, Ambrose's D-Day. And this is, of course, Citizen Soldiers. So this kind of picks up right after D-Day, and it follows the Allies, mostly the Americans, the American GI, all the way through, taking France, right up to the German border, Operation Market Garden into Holland, which didn't work, and then, eventually taking Germany and winning, ending the war in Europe. It's excellent. If you like D-Day, get this. Go find it. Download it on your Kindle. You will enjoy it. If you like D-Day, you're going to love this. Really, really good. So I read this earlier this year, so 2 Ambrose books. And the next books I want to talk about it's going to be 2 books that I talk about. And before I read any other detailed book on a specific aspect of World War II, I want to get a broad, kind of comprehensive view of the entire war. In both theaters. So I have 2 books, and I'm not sure which one I'm going to pick. One of these I've mentioned before, but the first one is John Keegan's The Second World War. I've heard very good things about his 1-volume history of World War I. This is his World War II book. And I like this. This is kind of an older copy, and the orange doesn't show up. By the way, I've got new camera settings. I'm trying to get the video quality to improve. That orange doesn't look very orange, but it is an orange spine penguin. And when I'm in a used bookstore, I'm kind of keeping my eye out for these. They really kind of pop out on the shelf. And I've got a few other John Keegan books about just war in general that I want to read at some point this year. But I think for my 1-volume history of World War, I'm leaning towards this one, mostly because it's a little shorter. Also, this book, I really like it. It's nice, big. It's a nice big floppy trade paperback with big, huge pictures just kind of sprinkled throughout. Sometimes big, full-page images. Really, really cool. So I think I'm leaning towards this one as my next World War II book. But I also have, and I've mentioned this one before, but this is Robert Leckie's Delivered from Evil, The Saga of World War II. I recently read Robert Leckie's George Washington's War, his history of the entire Revolutionary War, and I loved it. I love how Robert Leckie... he writes short, bite-sized chapters. He'll write a biography of a major player when they're introduced into the narrative. He'll kind of give their whole life story up into the point where we jump back into the narrative. And his writing, he's a great writer. He finds humor in a lot of things, and he just tells a great story and knows that history is a story, and does a very good job of that. So I don't know, but this book is 1,000 pages. There are other World War II books I want to read that are more focused on singular events in the war. This is really big, and I've said before, I am not a fast reader, so leaning towards this one. If there's anyone out there that has read both of these, which one would you recommend? I might do this one, maybe this one. Anyway, there they are. Next up, once I read my 1-volume history, I think the next book I will read is this is always highly recommended. It's At Dawn We Slept: The Untold Story of Pearl Harbor by Gordon W. Prange. I'm not good with names. Sorry, folks. Another orange spine. The orange shows up here a little bit better than this one. Another orange spine penguin trade paperback. Very excited about this. I've heard it's usually highly recommended when you look at, hey, what are good World War II books to read? And I was very happy to find this in my used bookstore. So that's going to be after my big 1-volume history that I read, so I'll read this one. The next books I want to talk about, and I might just kind of sprinkle these in. I'm not sure when exactly I'll read them, but I had them on my shelf. First one is another Robert Leckie book, and this is called Helmet for My Pillow, From Paris Island to the Pacific. Of course, Robert Leckie. He was a Marine that served in the Pacific during World War II, and the miniseries The Pacific used this book as one of its sources, and Robert Leckie is a character in that story. Eugene Sledge, and the name of his book is escaping me. I was actually just talking to a relative today, and she recommended Sledge's book to me, and I said, well, hey, I've got this on my shelf. I haven't read it yet, but you should read this as well. Leckie's a great author. So not very long. Got a picture of the actor that plays Robert Leckie. This actor he was in season 3 of 24. Don't remember his name, but there he is. Anyway, if you like 24, there's your World War II 24 Robert Leckie connection. I'm excited to read this at some point. Don't know when I'll get to it, but I'll kind of throw it in there somewhere. It's not very long. Another book that when I want to kind of, unfortunately, you will have to address the Holocaust at some point. I have read in the past. It's on another bookshelf, but I have read Night by Eli Wiesel. And man, if you haven't read that book, I'm sure many people read it at school, but I would recommend it. But this is another book on the Holocaust. It's called Ordinary Men, Reserve Police Battalion 101, and the Final Solution in Poland by Christopher R. Browning. This was not a book that I bought. I think probably a relative at some point in my when I was growing up, a sibling probably had to read it for school. And just as I was leaving home, when I finally left home, I just kind of took my mom gave me books. Here, take books. These aren't yours, but take them. So I think this is one of them. So I've never read this. I stuck it on my World War II shelf, and kind of my new bookcase with my several TBR lists, and I threw this on the World War II shelf. So I'll probably read this at some point this year. Not very long, so I don't know when I'll get to it, but I've got it. Another Ambrose book that I have, and I was very happy to find this very nice hardback copy. It's called The Wild Blue: The Men and Boys Who Flew the B-24s Over Germany. There's a series called Masters of the Air. I hope I'm not mistaken, but it's a relatively recent Apple TV. I think it's on Apple TV show, and I'm fairly certain it is mostly based on this book. Apologies if I'm wrong, but it's another Ambrose book. I will notice I'm not bringing up Band of Brothers. I don't own it yet. I'll probably get it at some point next time I go to the bookstore. Every bookstore has that book. But I think I want to read this first. I've seen the show Band of Brothers several times, so I'd be more inclined, I think, to read something that I'm not as familiar with. And I've never, read a book on the Army Air Corps. So I've got it. A lot of these books are actually leading up to this next book. And when I started my kind of book buying binge, this was one of the very first books that I bought this year. I bought it, but I didn't. I knew I wanted to read more World War II books to kind of work my way up to this. I think I bought it after I finished D-Day, which was very early in January this year. And this is a biography on President Eisenhower. It's called Eisenhower in War and Peace by Gene Edward Smith. And if you look up lists of what are good presidential biographies to read, this is always at the top of the list. So I'm very excited. It's a beautiful, beautiful, nice fat trade paperback. I hope I stick with it. I've discovered that I do like military history. I have read a biography earlier this year. It was a biography, totally different subject. Well, there is a World War II connection. It's a biography on the Japanese director Ishiro Honda, who, of course, if you know that name, he directed the first Godzilla movie and a bunch of other movies. He's a great kind of working studio director for Toho in Japan. One of my favorite, probably my favorite Japanese director, actually, besides maybe Ozu. Anyway, that's movie stuff. We'll talk about movies later. But that's the first biography I've read in a very long time. I generally don't get excited about biographies. So hopefully I'll start reading this and I'll enjoy it. But I am going to work my way kind of through the rest of most of these World War II books, I think, before I get to this. But I am very excited. So the point is, I've got all these reading lists, and usually they're based around a goal. A book that's kind of the end point. And for World War II, this is the end point that I'm kind of building my way up towards. So hopefully I get there this year. I have several reading lists, several subjects. I've realized to keep reading, I need variety. So I may not finish these this year. Reading a lot of Westerns, reading a lot of Star Trek. I've got a classics shelf that I need to get through. I've got all of Jane Austen that I've never... I just read my first Jane Austen this year. It was great. So I've got Jane Austen, other classics. I've got ancient classics. I've read the Iliad this year. I've got to read the Odyssey. I've got a lot of reading lists to get through. So at some point I will make a video upstairs, and maybe I'll do another bookshelf and go over another TBR list of another subject. But that's all for now. Oh, I didn't bring it down here, but I do have another Eisenhower book kind of as maybe a post-credit for my World War II book, kind of leading into the Cold War. It's called Ike's Bluff, and I think it's about the possibility, the Cold War and potential nuclear war. So excited to read that as well. I also have, I did not bring it down here, but another series that I do have is Rick Atkinson's Liberation Trilogy. North Africa is the first book, Italy's the second book, and then I guess France and Western Europe is the third book. And I do have those, so we'll see if I get to these this year. But this has been a long video. Thanks. If you stuck here this long, thank you. And I'll see you next time. Thank you.